Okay, I'm assuming you all can see my screen. If not, Matthew, please feel free to unmute yourself and let me know. But if not, I'll just go on. So thank you everyone for joining this talk. Whoever is watching, I'm glad that you're here. I want to talk about visualizing DevRel scope and goals primarily for two reasons. I personally have found DevRel to be a space where there's a lot of overlaps. And when there are a lot of overlaps and you work with multiple teams and with different goals, it becomes harder to justify a vision or to talk directly and clearly about what you exactly do, right? And also depending upon I've worked with bigger companies and smaller companies, right? So I want to talk about this to understand no matter which company you're working with, it still holds, some relevance wherever you are. So I'll start with a little bit about myself. So I've spent 9 years in DevRel now. I'm currently a developer relations engineer at AUKUS. AUKUS is, a cloud-based offering on Netflix Conductor. So the founding members are founding engineers of Netflix Conductor. They all came out of Netflix, and now we're building on top of it. Recently, this year, I won the CMX Developer Relations Professional of the Year award. So thanks to everybody who voted for me, and I'm very honored to receive that award. And previous companies that I've worked with are Google, Amazon, and Accurate, right, and a few other startups. So I want to start with just quickly telling you about the agenda. So we're going to talk about the type of companies that we have that can this might be useful for. We'll also talk about visualizing the scope, developer relation functions, and we'll break down the goals based on the functions that we define. We'll also talk about very briefly about managing up, down, and sideways. I think some of that was already talked about in great detail in the conference already, and then we'll open up for question and answers. So to begin with, right? So just so you know that, and I'm sure like a lot of people, if you're here, you're already a developer relations leader. You already know that there's a developer first company and there's a developer plus. So developer first companies are companies whose primary focus are to create and sell products specifically for developers. So if you're creating Twilio or if you have Confluence, right, Jira, things like that. So these are primarily for developers. And if you're using let's say an SDK or a backend service which developers use to create something, that's developer plus. So developers act as one of the bridges that you have to cross to actually go and reach the audience that you'll use the product. So think of it this way, right? Like if a developer first company would be a person who makes the knife. So the chef becomes a developer, right? So they will be using the knife. And for developer plus, the person who's eating the food made with that knife becomes developer plus, right? So essentially your food is also making impact at the later stage, but the developer has to use it first to actually make that impact. So that's one of the things. You can see the distinct, the distribution. Developer first are 32, one third of the companies, and developer plus are more. So all the strategies that we talk about today are going to be relevant for both of these companies. And before we start, I also want to mention that all these opinions are just my own, and we always need to consider that every advice that we hear on the internet comes with their own context. So I've tried to keep this as broad as I can to ensure that it's not very specific or niche and it doesn't resonate with most of you, but at the same time it will depend a lot on the company size and what functions you perform with. So in case you need more chit chatting around this, or I want to discuss more strategies, you can reach out to me. I'll send you my social details, and then we'll further take it from there. So to talk about scope, right? Like one of the things that I've noticed across working with different companies is that DevRel kind of touches primarily three focus areas: this product, engineering, and marketing. So let's take an example, right? Let's take one. Let's call our product product ABC, right? So this is a product that a developer needs to use to actually build something, like probably ship out faster, reduce testing times, and so forth. So there will be a product team which will be essentially made of product managers, product marketing managers, assistant product managers, things like that. Engineering will have engineering leaders, developers, and there obviously will be marketing, which has marketing managers, social media, content, things, right? Now, DevRel will actually have will closely work with one of these three or maybe all of them. So you could be working in a company depending upon the scale and the size with all three of these verticals or just one or two of them. So considering that as a possibility, let's understand if you work with a team that you have all three of these. What is the scope? Like what can DevRel touch and what can it influence? So consider this, right? Like let's assume all of them overlap. The overlapping that comes out becomes three things, right? There's a developer experience, developer marketing, and community. Now, if you notice closely, right? So there's product and engineering overlap comes out, makes developer experience. Now, a developer experience as a segment is primarily focused towards improving the customer delight of the developers. It elevates their experience directly from where they find the product all the way till they actually use it and send their NPS or feedback that I like the product or did not. So directly from the awareness, all the way from awareness right at the very end where they have done with the job and they can move on to the next one. How was their entire experience in their journey? Where all did they fall? Where all they found, their experience could have been better? Did they find the documentation on the right time or not? And if you look at product and marketing's overlap, which is developer marketing, this is where this is considered this like an orbit, right? Think of it the outermost layer where the developers need to find the product or you need to be made aware of the product. A lot of developers actually speak at conferences, much like myself and much like right now, right? We are here to actually talk about the product and the impact that it can create. Now, when we talk about the product in conferences and make people more aware through our content, through our written blogs and so forth, what we're trying to do is essentially reach out to developers who are potentially looking for similar products, or at least keep this product in their subconscious mind. So whenever they are out there looking for something similar, we are at least on their radar, right? There's a beautiful website here called Tech Radar, I think. They have, they tell you which tool is in what radar and how many developers are considering buying that. So to reach there itself is in its own feat, right? And this is what product and marketing overlaps into and creates developer marketing. One of the things which I'm really passionate about, and I think this is something that has caught up like a lot in last few years, is the community aspect of actually building things, especially DevRel. I think the way community works in DevRel and actually technical spaces is far more nuanced and far more sophisticated than a lot of other things that I've seen. The way that communities function within DevRel is just astounding, because not only it actually does a peer-to-peer learning, so there could be a developer looking for questions and there is another community person who answers it, but there are a lot of community members who will build the solutions that people like themselves or their peers are looking for. So once you reach that space, right, where it's not just peer-to-peer learning, but it's also like peers are building for peers and they're consuming within, you reach a very holistic, self-sustained model. And I think from there on, it's a very sorted and very great road ahead. So we'll talk about all three of these a little more in detail as we go. So the first thing that I want to talk about is developer experience, right? And before I do that, I just wanted to tell you that considering you have all three of these verticals in your company, or just one or two of them, and depending where the DevRel sits, which role does it report to? Does it report to the CEO, CTO, marketing? This diagram could be influenced. But assuming we want to keep this generic and you want to work, there is a possibility of overtaking these goals and having the scope of actually working with all three of them, we'll move forward and consider all of them individually. Now, these are three functions. One of the first function that we'll talk about is developer experience. Now, we spoke about how developer experience starts from all the way where they identify the product right at the very end, where they use the product and actually move on to the next step in the cycle. So the North Star goal here is to actually find developer delight, right? And the reason I say North Star is that you could find X number of ways to build goals, right? Like, and to find ways to actually improve the customer delight. I mentioned few of the goals here that we focus on and you can do. But if there is anything that focuses you or directs you towards the goal where there is developer delight, I think you should consider that. One of the things that we, the most obvious thing that comes into the mind is documentation. Developers are people who like to figure out things on their own. The first thing that they look for whenever they identify a new product to work with is documentation. How frequent is the documentation updated? How well versed it is it missing anything? Those are few things that we take care of. Now, one of the things where developer first companies or even developer plus companies, right? If you actually go out to them and tell them that this is what we have for you, what they'll do is they'll talk about the infrastructure or the the stack that they're working in, and then tell you that can something like this fit into whatever system that we've built. We don't want to change our systems or our ways just because we are using your tool. So that challenge involves building demo applications, use cases, and plugins for the developers. Now, not only when you're selling, right? Like a lot of times you want to uh, kind of flex and showcase the reach of your product. So building demo applications, use cases, and plugins, like no code plugins, right? There are a lot of ways where there is an open source version of the same product, much like Orcus, and there's obviously like a cloud version, and there are no code plugins for the same thing. One of the companies that we worked with was an auth api, and auth api also had a no code plugin, right? So depending upon whichever uh, developer you're working with, you have to make sure that you're building for them and for the ecosystem that they already operate in. Another thing that we do here very frequently is being developer zero. Now, developer zero means that before it reaches the market, before there is even a first developer that checks out your newest release or your latest, latest development or update, developer relation team, like DevRel teams, actually become developer zero and test the product in house. They share their experiences, they share their insights, and they tell what broke where, what can be improved in terms of UI, UX functionalities, and performance, and so forth. And if that flies, it kind of moves on to the next phase. So the reason like developer zero is like a great segment here is that it not only acts as a QA for the product, but it also brings, like, developer relations have that foresight and also the scope to understand that if it goes to the community that they've usually worked very closely with, how will that be received? And dev zeros usually have the foresight and understanding of what was our community expecting with our latest release, so they can also influence and check for that as well, and keep the community informed. So that's one of the things that we do with developer experience. You can see the overlap is between product and engineering, right? Similarly, the next thing was developer marketing. So let's say you've built something, right? Let's say you've built a tool, or like you've built like a functionality that is ready to go ahead in the market. Now you're now the goal comes out that you want to make people aware, and we want to make sure that you're present in the conversations where people are discussing a potential use case or potential solution to what you've built. How do you do that? One of the things very obviously would you think about social media presence and engagement. You would collaborate with a lot of people, you will release a lot of content, you'll do hackathons, meetups, and you'll create advocacy programs like student programs, campus programs, or meetup chapters, things like that. Anything that involves other people talking about the product, or at least creating some buzz or some news around it. Now, this is something which is very easy to understand. It's an overlap between product and marketing. I'm sure this is people have been doing this for a year, or like for years, right? And the reason DevRel also can touch upon this is that the way DevRels will explain something kind of sits closer to what developers would want, and I think they can sense the terminology, sense the compassion, empathy that DevRels put in actually releasing beautiful content, something which is easier to understand, something which is easier to work with. So DevRels can also touch a lot of these goals, right? And the North Star goal, like I said, is awareness and presence. So if you can find more goals, I would love to know what those are. Anything that can create the virality of what you're doing. It could be any sense. A lot of people kind of consider GitHub stars as developer marketing metric. That could work for some of you. But yes, so these are a few goals that I kind of pay heed to whenever I'm thinking about developer marketing. And the last one, as we saw, was community management, right? So this is like an overlap between engineering and marketing. The reason like community management has like engineering aspect is because for like, this there is something about engineers explaining to other engineers that is something irreplaceable, right? And North Star goal here is to not, like we spoke about before, was not only to instill peer-to-peer learning, but also find ways that your community has self-sustaining models, right? So somebody asks a question within the community and gets answers immediately from other community members. So community generated content becomes like the hardest to achieve, but also the most is the gold standard. It's the like the last mile, so to say, right? Of community actually caring about the product and caring about people who are using product. And content could be anything. It's not necessarily videos and audio podcasts and things like that, but also simple answers like this is what you can do, right? One of the things that we do is that in developer marketing, you saw that we have written audio video, right? So we do a lot of podcasts. We also do YouTube videos. We do a lot of meetups. And community, you can also use your community management users, find these people who have been strongly advocating about your product and answering a lot of questions, and use them for developer marketing to actually talk about their experiences, their ways of solving issues, and take them on your podcast, take them on your YouTube videos, and use that and make a star out of your community. Because not only it rewards their loyalty and the time that they spend on your product, but it also makes them a better leader, a better communicator, and potentially a devil, right? Like who knows, maybe they like doing this so much that they eventually change their path. And I think you can be a pivotal point in that, in their journey if they pursue that path. You also, as in community management, find ways to support onboarding issues and also working issues. A lot of people use Discord, Slack, and Discourse, or whatnot, to actually find these questions and get these answered. And that's a great channel to actually build feedback channels as well. For me personally, I think one of the gold standards of actually building a product with community is where not only community uses your product, but it also influences it, right? So a community led product would be such that community has an idea of where the product is headed. They're not only involved in the decision making process, or like, and also like, they also find a way to actually plan their releases or plan their upcoming near future based on the product that you're that they're working with, and that case could be yours, right? Community led product so comes with the philosophy that, imagine if you're a Chelsea fan, right? If you're into football, let's say you're a Chelsea fan, and there is Chelsea says that, for this season we want you to design our jersey, right? And if you actually take out the time and design a jersey, and that gets selected and they wear it throughout the season or for one match, whatever, the level of ownership or the level of you're hooked into their success, you're invested now, because your hard work and your insights and your whatever you've built with, right, it's not only was paid attention to, but it was actually implemented. And that creates a little bit of investment in their success. They root for you, they become your fans, and they wish for your prolonged success because they feel connected to the cause. That's one of the ways that I think community can not only use the product, but also influence and build with it. That can only happen if there is a feedback channel open, and feedback channels need to be open through Discord, Slack, or whoever, and you need to take time to actually do community calls, roundtables, to understand where this is headed, right? It takes time to build, but it's definitely worth it, and I think it's one of the hardest goals to achieve, but definitely one of the most rewarding and fulfilling ones for both the parties, the businesses as well as the community members. So that's something that we can do in community management. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about, right, is managing up, down, and sideways. So a lot of these things will kind of boil down to two things. One is that you have to get buy-ins from the stakeholders that you're working with. Now we saw that community, DevRel is working with engineering, product, and and marketing, which involves a lot of stakeholders, which involves a lot of buy-ins, which involves finding budgets and then allocating them where and however. There could be overlaps, right? So one of the ways that a lot of people can actually segregate their stakeholders is this, right? So you can see that on the y-axis there is influence of the stakeholders, and the x there is interest of the stakeholders. So you can find under which department where they work and kind of assign them something, right? So if they have high influence and high interest, they're key player. They're not only interested in what you're doing, they can also fund it or get things done for you and make sure that there are no roadblocks. So you have to manage them very closely. People with high interest but very little high influence and very little interest, um, they are obviously on the table because they have high influence and they can make things go your way if their goals are met. So one of the things that you can do when you're looking actually building something like this is reach out to the departments that you'll be working with, identify stakeholders, right? Identify their overlaps, and then understand what are these overlaps that you can be working with. So you worked with product team, speak to the head of product or chief product officer or product managers, understand what their goals are, understand what can be built here, and then come back to the diagram that we have, right? Three walls Venn diagram. And then once we've done that, we can allocate these stakeholders here. Now repeat this process with marketing as well as engineering, and once you have like goals from all three of them, it's very easy to create something like this. Because not only will you have the insight into leaders from product engineering marketing, but you'll also have insights into what goals matter to them, what are their priority wise, what is something that they're allocating maximum budget to, what are some things that they're always hiring for, what are few things that they need help on, right? And once you find these things, right, once you find the overlaps between all of these things, you could say, here is what I've heard from all of you, here are the overlaps that I've found, I'm going to kind of work with all of these overlaps that I have. Here's the budget that I require for it, here are the people that I need to hire. And once that is done, it becomes easier to kind of get their buy-ins and get that budget approved, because they understand the overlap. And I'm sure like your communication would actually ensure, they not only actually buy in your opinions, but they actually invested in it, right? And you can see where they stand based on the metric that we have here. Once that's taken care of, I think it becomes like an easier road to walk. And from there on, it's fairly easy to kind of get your goals met. That's all I think that I had to talk about, right? Like those are a few things that I wanted to discuss. If you have further questions, right, you can reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I'm sure like there are further questions, like there are further conversations that can thrive from here. I would love to know how many people actually use this kind of model already, or how many people just work with the only engineering or only product or marketing, and then understand how do you guys manage this. But I hope this there was something to take away from all of you. But and if case there is something that you would like to discuss or disagree upon, happy to get in touch on Twitter as well as LinkedIn.